know that we started very early, and I know that we haven't finished yet. And there is still some very interesting parts to this day. And I would like to introduce Professor Manuel Trajtenberg, who is an, maybe I should say is economist, Israeli economist, and the previous chair of the Planning and Budgeting Committee and the Council of Higher Education in Israel. And I think you are here because of this mainly. And but as I already mentioned, by now his life has changed, and he's not only an economist in Tel Aviv University with a fun life, but he is part of the parliament and is coming, you know, probably between two meetings. And I really appreciate the time and the effort. It's not an easy task to be here. Just to say that Manuel was born in Argentina, and he made Aliyah with when he was a teenager or something like that. And I know Manuel from other occasions, and maybe the one things that impressed me most, I should say personally, is that we had a meeting here in the Institute for Advanced Studies in which we invited all new recruitment of Israel to come and to know what's their life is going to be, you know, their future as academia. And one thing that Manuel shared with us was take responsibility and be involved in public effort. And I remember this as a very important message, because this is the opposite what their professor will tell them. The first 10 years you have to publish as many as you want and so on. I mean, and this message really filtered down to the people, and many, I heard quite a lot of response to this important message. And I personally take it very personally, and I must say that I'm sharing it with other young people. So I think you already made an impact, at least on people that I know. And it's really a great pleasure to have him as a keynote for today. We will have a question-answer session immediately after. So again, thank you, Manuel, for being with us.
Thank you very much.
You can sit.
No, I prefer to stand. I sit too much. Okay, so good afternoon to you all. It's a real pleasure to be here. I studied here in this particular campus. I did my first and second degree, and then I did my PhD at Harvard. But this is home for me when I think about a campus to which I feel that I belong to. It's here. And I know that I offend people that of the Hebrew University that are at the Mount Scopus, but this is it. There is no substitute. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to address you. I don't know, unfortunately, I don't know you personally, but I know about what you do, and I think it's an extraordinary scientific activity. So. Given what my life looks like these days, it's quite a respite, to be able to be here. So what I intend to do is to talk about the challenges that higher education systems face throughout the world, and what could be some of our responses to those challenges. I intend to speak for about 30 minutes and open it up to questions. I don't have my patience to listen to myself too long. So let me start by saying the obvious, which is that we live in the 21st century in what was supposed to be the golden era of science and research and higher education. It seems that all these historical forces that started essentially with the Bologna University model and then, with the scientific revolution and the Humboldt University and the Vannevar Bush manifesto during the Second World War and so forth, it seemed that all that had converged into this golden era. And indeed, there have been extraordinary achievements of the scientific and higher education enterprise. From the obvious, which is the scientific accomplishment themselves, to the fact that the number of students, the proportion of the population in most countries that is getting higher education has risen to unprecedented levels. The fact that acquiring higher education had become already a few decades ago a prime ladder of upward mobility and so forth and so on. So indeed, it's when you look at all that, you can sit back and relax and say, well, it also commands a lot of prestige. Still, when you say I'm a professor, it's better received than if you say I'm a banker, with good reason. And of course, the fact that the trouble is we need them. and essentially, knowledge now is pervasive. We live in the so-called knowledge society and knowledge economy, and we in academia, let me speak as we, even though I took some time off from that. We are the purveyors and the creators of knowledge. So what could be better than that? Well, there are some clouds above us, and we have to pay attention to them. What are these big challenges? To begin with, there has been, as I said before, a tremendous growth in scientific activity, not necessarily commensurable to scientific output. What has happened is that what used to be a very elitist kind of activity of occupation has become massified, not only within countries, but essentially now every other country wants to become essentially a prime player in the field of science, technology, higher education, and so forth. There are now in the world, by last count, 198 countries, I think, something like that. Well, we all understand that not 129 and 198 players can be very high up. Okay, we understand that. But, that's what's happening. I mean, it has become the kind of the fashion of the day to try to be on top in academia and so forth. And there is a big question, which I will try to provide some answers. Could it be that there is excess competition at the global level? Or rather, what are the pluses and minuses of this tremendous amount of competition worldwide in the scientific arena? This is a completely new phenomenon. Competition, there always was. I mean, that's one of the kind of the forces that drive us, even though we don't acknowledge them. No, it's, we do that all of it because we like it. It's true. But, we also want to prove ourselves in our communities, scientific communities, and there is a competitive force there. Never, ever before something like this happened in history. So that's kind of what to do vis-a-vis, what are the pluses and vis-a-vis this tremendous exponential growth. The second is the tremendous increase in costs of the scientific enterprise. And the costs are of two types: financial costs and also costs in terms of running the system. Call them the overhead costs, which I will describe. The third challenge is that Nowadays, well, once upon a time, a university, the system had essentially to provide for two functions, to do two missions, and two only: research, creating new knowledge, and transmitting that new knowledge, particularly to the elites. That was what the best universities did. That was what was expected. Now there are a multiplicity of roles and expectations towards the higher education system, the scientific community, and the question is how the system responds to that multiplicity of roles. And the fourth challenge has to do with something which we thought it was kind of trivial, and it isn't. Teaching. Teaching has become a huge question mark. What to teach? How to teach? What should you do with these emerging disruptive technologies such as MOOCs and so forth and so on? Huge questions in that respect. So let me try to address each of these challenges one at a time. First of all, the growth of the scientific enterprise worldwide and the competition that comes with it. I don't have updated numbers. So the numbers I'm going to quote are old, and I'm sure that since then the numbers have grown. Okay, but it's kind of, take it as a lower bound. Okay. There are about 6 million researchers worldwide. 6 million. Okay, and this is a lower bound. This is a mind-boggling figure. When I first came about that, it couldn't be true. I mean, I think that is 1 0, that is too many, right? Well, I mean, according to the classifications, or the standard classifications, people that are classified by the statistical agencies of their countries as researchers, 6 million. There are over 25,000 peer-reviewed scientific journals. There are over 1 million ISI papers published per year. 1 million. But that's just those that are categorized in the ISI. There are others, an additional 1.5 million, which are not in the ISI. And according to some statistics, about half of them are never cited in the first 5 years. So there is a huge machinery producing junk. And the number of students, okay, this is, I don't know exactly, but there are over, again, these numbers are lower bounds, 160 million. Now, these are mind-boggling numbers, okay? And I will try to put that in perspective in a moment. But, so the question, why is that happening? Well, growth. Part of it is just growth of GDP, standards of living rise. You want to study, we expect more from the system, etc. We invest more in higher education, in research as countries grow, okay? So it's one of the side consequences of economic growth in population, okay? So because I quoted absolute numbers, okay? And the fact that multiplicity of countries. Again, we have now, as I said, almost 200 countries worldwide. This is new. There were never so many in the modern era. Okay, so many countries, each of them wanting to become a player in this arena. So that's kind of one of the forces. The second one is that, as I said before, there are all these expectations that society and the economy puts on the scientific system. We want the scientific system to deliver all these goodies. We want to keep these things improving, right? There are tremendous forces. So we need science to feed into that. We need science to feed into curing us, prolonging life, okay? So there are so many aspects of life that we have grown accustomed to the fact that they improve constantly due to tremendous advances in science, but then we expect more and more, and the questions become more complicated, more sophisticated, and so forth. Okay, so that puts pressure on that. There are, of course, the inner forces of scientific inquiry, the Thomas Kuhn type of normal science, right? And the more researchers there are, the more you push, right? And therefore there is more room to do that. There are also technological advances that call for or open up new areas of inquiry. You know, the CERN, okay? It opened up areas of inquiry that were impossible before. So you have CERN, okay, now we have 1,000 scientists doing research there in particle physics that we couldn't do before, okay? Or there are tremendous advances in the what we call the DNA machines that in sequencing, okay? The plunging of the prices, okay? So all that pushes also the demand for more research of the kind. Now, the interesting question is, as I said before, is that sort of competition, global competition, good, efficient? I'm an economist, so I'm supposed to say, yeah, you know, the more competition we have, we hate monopolies, duopolies, okay, oligopolies. We hate that, okay? So the more competition there is, the better. And yes, there are 6 million researchers, as we say in Hebrew, ala kefak, you know, it's great. Not quite. Not quite. Why? Because the object that's being produced in this market is capital K, knowledge, which is one of the paramount public goods. Competition works well for private goods in economics, not for public goods. And therefore, almost inevitable, you may have easily excess competition that causes rising costs, replication of efforts, and all sorts of pressures that can be very detrimental to a scientific effort. And you know, the one way of figuring out what the public good is think of a symphony by Mozart, okay? Well, at the time, you know, the late 18th century, when Mozart composed his work, his music, there were about 1 billion people in the world. Now there are 7. We need just one Mozart. They can, you know, 7 billion people can enjoy Mozart the same way that 1 billion enjoy. I mean, it's not that you need to replicate, okay? It's the nature of a public good. The fact that I listen to the symphony doesn't mean that you are not going to listen to it, okay? It's not mutually exclusive. So that's and there are market failures associated with the production of knowledge, moral hazard, and so forth. I won't go into that. But clearly, it's not the market as we conceive it, of perfect competition, the more, the better, the merrier, okay, does not apply as is to the production and diffusion of knowledge. I mentioned the escalating cost of the scientific enterprise. Let's start from the less obvious, which is the overhead cost. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, nowadays, PIs, principal investigators, particularly those in the life sciences, they spend about almost half of their time, on average, pushing paper, essentially. Okay, meaning, you know, managing or the application of grants or the reviewing of grants or the committees or whatnot. Now, imagine what that means. A scientific system that takes some of the best minds, okay, and deploy those minds into pushing paper. They could be showering snow. It will be the same. You know, it will be any difference. I mean, so there is a big problem here in terms of what the system has grown in a way that, you know, causes what we call in economics the misallocation of one of the most important and precious resources that we have in humanity. I always think, you know, I mean, imagine Einstein, spending half his time refereeing papers and sitting in committees and, and discussing the promotion of this and that, and then, there are amazing pressures put on peer reviews that cause mistakes in the best of cases, if not cheating, fraud, scientific. There is nothing more serious than scientific fraud. It's something, I want to suggest to you that I think that anybody that has a position of influence within academia should try to work to minimize, if not eliminate, scientific fraud. And you have to be proactive, not reactive. Because that, I'm telling you that if this continues, the amount of scientific fraud, and oftentimes it's not clear whether it's a mistake or fraud, okay? But the more there are, the more people and the public at large are not going to buy a mistake, and they're going to generalize, okay? In my view, scientific fraud is the equivalent of corruption in politics. When there is too much, then the people lose confidence in government and in democracy. Okay? So I'm saying, but the pressures of the system lead, I'm not justifying, but they lead to that. And there is more risk aversion in judging papers and grants. People, you want to keep on the safe side. So something that looks too innovative, you're not sure you're going to give the grant, you're not sure that you are going to publish, and so forth. The bodies that administer the scientific enterprise, the big bodies, be it the big and the small, be it the NSF, the NIH, or the ERC, or here in Israel, the Israeli Science Foundation, or the bodies that I was in charge of, they have become overburdened with bureaucracy, with procedures, with trying to manage this beastly enterprise that has grown too big to be managed in the way we used to. So that's a huge cost put on the system. And you have to understand also, something which is the number of first-rate journals doesn't grow by definition. Can't grow by definition. The number of Nobel Prizes doesn't grow. And therefore, when you expand the base, the competition for the same number of excellent positions or accomplishments or what, it's totally out of hand. Okay, because your life depends upon it. Promotion and this and that. Now, and then there are the budgetary pressures by themselves. Yes. There is faster obsolescence of scientific equipment. The cycles now in some fields are of 5 years, in some fields are less than that. They used to be much longer. Okay? And each generation is not necessarily more costly, because sometimes the costs go down, but then the quantity increases, so you end up with this more expenditures and not less. Then there is the phenomenon of, because of this worldwide competition for talent, that beats up the salaries. Okay, so the fact that Singapore establishes, or the Emirates, or whatever, and I'm not, saying anything, there's nothing wrong with it, don't misunderstand me, but the fact that they're ready to pay $500,000 for an excellent top-of-the-line professor to spend there 3 months a year, and I know that, then what can you do to retain him or her? Okay, well, that beats up all the salaries, okay? And you end up with a situation like in the US, that things have gotten completely out of hand in terms of the competition between the main universities and the tuition and so forth. I mentioned tuition. The massification of higher education, when you look at it and you look at tuition on the other side, things don't match up. Okay? on both sides. In the US, tuition has increased much faster than the CPI, okay, has created a macro problem of debt because of the loans that the students, it exceeds now the debt $1 trillion, okay, which is completely crazy. On the other hand, in Europe, there has been some increase in tuition. Countries that didn't have tuition trying, some have succeeded in imposing some tuition, but it doesn't keep up. So you have the two phenomena that neither of them is good. And then there is the fiscal crunch that came with the 2008 financial crisis that is still there. Okay, it's very strong, even in the U.S. The contraction in budgets, particularly at the state level. Okay, we saw that in California, in other places. So that's kind of the picture, which is really a sobering picture in both, the overhead cost and the other costs. The third challenge is the multiplicity of roles of academia. Now, academia is supposed to, beyond research, pure research and the education of the elites, they are supposed to contribute to growth of the economy, to regional growth. There is this expectation, every province, every region say, well, what do we do? Yeah, there is Silicon Valley. How Silicon Valley happened? There is Stanford and then, the high tech. Or Boston. How it happened? Well, it's very simple. You put Harvard and MIT and then things happen. So what do I want? I want the university here and then everything will follow. It doesn't work that way. Okay? But there is that expectation that the system will contribute to that regional development. Of course, the training for a changing labor market, that's a very legitimate expectation, and I will expand on that on a moment. Mission-oriented research, that hasn't changed. Since Second World War, we are there. The space, the military, fight on cancer, etc., we expect academia to deliver. And now we are talking about energy, water, climate change. These are the big things that we expect science to deliver. We expect, as I said before, that academia should serve as a vehicle of social mobility. What people have trouble understanding is that mobility implies that there is a range. If everybody moves, then it becomes very crowded. Okay? So there is a problem with the expectations there. There is the expectation that academia should be a main player in cultivating and storing cultural heritage. It's a good expectation. And transmitting social norms, very good expectation. Everything is fine, except that the university as an institution, as we know it, was conceived when there were just 2 missions. Now there are 5, 6. And the institutions have not responded with institutional diversity and flexibility to meet all those expectations. And so there is a contradiction between the two. And the last one is the challenge of the new challenge of teaching. Now this, I want to, later I become very minded. I don't know why, but I'm not teaching now, but maybe because of that. Essentially, what has happened is that now that we teach for the masses, okay, when in Israel, 50% of each cohort that finishes high school enters higher education, okay? So that's mass. When I studied, we were 23% of each cohort, okay? It's a dramatic change. So the question is, from the point of view of the young generation, is what's the relevance of acquiring an academic degree for a changing, dynamic, really cruel job market, okay? See what's happening in many countries in Europe where the youth unemployment reaches 50%. 50%. And many, very many of those 50% acquired academic degrees. So it's a huge question. I mean, that question didn't exist when I studied. It was clear that if you get a degree, you will have a privileged position in the job market. Um, there is the question of academic degrees, the very structure, BA 3 years, MA, PhD, as opposed to the acquisition of skills. And the skills have of two types: generic skills and very, very specific skills. Okay, what do I mean? Generic skills is the ability, say, to, if I put it at the extreme, to think creatively and out of the box. It's kind of many times in job descriptions in high-tech industry they say that. Okay, but there are methodologies for that, by the way. Very specific is to write applications for. The other day somebody was describing that to me. It was amazing. A course, okay, to write applications to turn all sorts of things into to increase access to disabled people to all sorts of activities. So how to write application, generic application, but it's a very specific thing, okay, to increase accessibility to disabled people, okay? There are courses on that. So again, degrees, okay, as opposed to skills on demand, because those change all the time, okay? There are now legions, very many talented youngsters that are not sure that they want to go even to college, because, they say, what do I need that for? I can, read, learn whatever I want, almost, from the MOOCs, from other things, okay, acquire them on the march, okay, and keep shifting, with the shifts in the demands from the employment. This is very serious, okay. I see that, I talk a lot to youngsters here in Israel. There are a bunch that are incredibly talented. We see that in high tech. More and more of those talented youngsters lose patience with academic degrees. And I'm not saying that that's bad. What I'm saying is a challenge that we have to face. What about, we have heard this as a slogan for a long time, LLL, long life learning, okay? Yeah, okay? But wait a moment, okay? Now we are talking about life expectancy and aging that is reaching incredible proportions. We are talking about a looming crisis of pensions, okay, that nobody knows how we are going to face it because of obvious reasons, because, we live many more years and, the young generation is shrinking that can provide for the older people, so older people have to work longer years. But if they, at the age of 40, some of them become obsolete because what they study already is not relevant, what do you expect at the age of 70? So forget about the old slogan of LLL. Think of pensions, think of that, okay? And who is going to provide solutions or, kind of initiatives to meet that? And then there is the question of how to teach in the digital era. I'm sure that you as teachers, you have I presume, the same experience that I had, that, you sit here, you stand here, these are students, nobody is making eye contact with you. They are all immersed in some form of flat screen. Okay, it could be, they could be in the Facebook, they could be whatever, okay? Nobody is making eye contact, okay? And how do you teach, okay? Now I'm really used to that because in the Knesset, in Parliament, not only that nobody looks at you, there is nobody sitting. So that's okay, because they are elsewhere, okay? But in class, unless the class attendance is going down, okay? I saw some figures, I don't know whether they are true, but they're really dramatic. I mean, the drop in attendance in courses. What do we do with that? Okay? So what I want to say about those things is that, and now it's a statement for you. You are in a privileged position in these institutes in so many ways. Yeah, I'm saying that out of envy. That's true. I mean, but I think you have a responsibility. If you mention what I said to youngsters about, but here it's a different type of responsibility. In my view, academia is an incredible paradox. On the one hand, we are incredibly innovative, daring, adventurous and so forth when it comes to our field of research. On the other hand, we're incredibly conservative and we don't give a damn when it comes to the system we are part of. And we are reactive, not proactive, okay? And, we are individualists. We say, somebody else will take care of that, okay? Just give us more money and so forth. Well, gentlemen and ladies, it's not going to work that way. What I'm asking you is to take responsibility on these issues. Because if academia doesn't do that, say with teaching, okay, academia as we know it is not going to be sustainable, okay, its relevance will decline. It's not that it's going to disappear. Its relevance will decline. And more importantly, it will be incredibly hard to get funding from governments, okay? Because, if youngsters turn their back to academia in increasing numbers, you have to understand, governments, now that I look at it from the other side, they're not impressed when you publish a great paper in science. What gives you ecstasy for governments is, yes, what? Okay, what's there for me? Okay, but if you tell the government that there are, thousands of unsatisfied students that may go to the streets, that's serious, okay? So what I'm saying is that, somebody has to take responsibility, okay? Don't let the system deteriorate. It has reached its natural limits. It's like, dinosaurs, okay? At some point, they grow too big, okay? So, and you have to react to that. And there is something very funny. Things don't happen by themselves. These social diseases don't cure themselves. No, they don't. Somebody has to do it, okay? So that's now, there are lots of things that can be done beyond innovating, and that's what I'm asking you for. But clearly, incentives have to be changed. Much more emphasis on quality than on quantity. For example, I think that small step within universities, okay, promotion should be done according just to the 3 best papers. Don't give me any more than that. Don't even present to me the CV. I don't want to look at it. Not the 3, 5. Okay? Just if you change that, okay, it will be a tremendous impact on what people do, the quantity of junk that is being produced, the quantity of peer reviews, and so forth. Same thing with grants. Okay, the machinery of grants is just totally out of hand. Okay, rely more on citations than on impact factors. Okay, because it's anyway, you understand why. Reward also other dimensions of performance, because there are multiplicity of missions. Okay, now most of the faculty being employed in the US, I don't know how is it in Europe, they are not tenure track, they are adjunct faculty. It's a second-class citizenship which has grown enormously. And what about them? What do you expect them to happen with them? At some point, there will be a revolt. I mean, well, I don't know, hopefully or not hopefully, I'm saying as a fact, okay, or as a prediction. So, what do? Well, offer other avenues of advancement, of excellency, of reward, and so forth, reflecting the other missions. But somebody has to design that and implement that, etc., etc. Okay, set higher bars for what constitutes a paper for publishing, publish also negative results, and reward that. I had this idea in economics, and I put out a paper of the market for failures. There should be a market for failures. They have value to understand, because if I know what you try and fail, I won't try that. Okay. The disciplinary barriers within institutions are totally out of whack. I mean, there is no, the faculties, departments as we knew them, okay, don't at all relate to the current reality of science, where there is convergence and so forth, but every each her professor wants his or her own feudal enterprise, okay, to reign in it, and so forth and so on. Now, and there is a lot to do, but I've already passed my time completely. I'm sorry about that. And there is a lot to do about turning around the global competition into global cooperation. And just let me say that the other side of the coin, when you have many researchers and all, is that the probability of a good match increases with the variety, okay? But then you need a mechanism for good matching, okay? This is true in life, and it's true also in science, okay? So we should put much more effort in designing efficient mechanisms of matching, okay, researchers from all over the world, and much less in competition between. Anyway, the ultimate message is, yes, this is could be the golden era of science and higher education. So far, it could turn into something completely different if we don't walk out of the comfort zone and take on these big challenges. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much. So we learn more about it, and questions, please. But if you ask, just mention who you are and where are you from. Please.
Thank you for this really inspiring talk. My name is Prof. And I come from Mozart study in Berlin. And I agree with almost everything that you said, but I wonder whether what is the gold standard against which you are measuring this? I have the suspicion that it's a smaller system, the academic world, the university that is purely focused on research and serves the scientific system, whereas all the other functions are done by different institutions. Whereas one could say, okay, a lot of massification, many parts of the academic field are only there for education. And the fact that 50% of the papers are not cited is simply proving the misunderstanding of those university professors who are in reality teachers. So come on, where's the problem? If we put it on the teaching side and we say the elite will take care of itself in institutes like ours, then the university becomes a mediocre model, whereas a new upper level of research institutes will emerge. And then you have your old world, but only with a different set of institutional partners.
Right. No, actually, I agree with you. I mean, the point is not to aim back at the old system. I always look forward, not backwards. So the question is how to design institutions that are more flexible. That's exactly the point, okay, that can accommodate, for example, teaching as a main occupation of the majority of the faculty. But then, you see, we live in a pretense. What's the pretense? No. We are all part of the same, world of academia where we put first research and then teaching. And therefore, if you do mostly teaching and a little bit of make pretend research that gets published in a junk journal, well, you are okay, but you are a second or third class citizen and look up to me. I mean, that doesn't work in the long run, okay? We have to give room to these activities, to value them socially. There are social codes, okay? And these have to change, these norms. That's the most difficult part, is the culture, okay, that hasn't evolved enough. Yes, please.
say where you come from?
Okay. Well, that was a commentary which I welcome very much, not a question, but it's great. I mean, all these issues are incredibly important. Let me start with the role of politics. You see, nowadays governments, countries, they spend over 1% of GDP in higher education. Okay? That's a lot of resources. Okay? And the question is, can you conceive of a system whereby a government allocates 1% of GDP to an activity that it doesn't control at all? At all. Okay, so let's take it to an extreme. Okay? The answer is no. Okay? That system is unsustainable. On the other hand, we all understand that if politicians meddle with the scientific process, it will quickly degenerate, okay, and turn into something else, not science as we know it. Okay? So the question is how you manage this inherent tension between the fact that the government pays but has to be restrained in terms of how much it can intervene, okay, and the autonomy that is required in order for the system to flourish. Okay? There are different answers to that question. In Israel, by the way, we still have a system which is, in my view, no less than extraordinary in managing that tension. From time to time, there are incidents that are very worrisome, but there are no more than incidents. And, somehow we manage to, and I don't know whether you are exposed and you can explain to them, Michal, how the system works here, but it's very interesting. It's one system, there are many different systems. All what I'm trying to say is that oftentimes, and when I was in my previous job, I had many times big arguments with the presidents of the universities. Why? Because they often took the easy way, which is vis-a-vis this issue, which is to say, leave us alone, we know what's good for us, okay? Take these politicians out of view, okay? Well, it's very hard to do when they put down the billions of dollars on the table. So, all what I'm saying is, again, within academia there should be much more willingness to tackle this issue and give it its proper, in a way that is not self-serving, that understands that there is a tension and that you have to manage it. Okay, so that's kind of the. I could. There's no time. I could go into details how to do that. What you say about inequality and so forth, and yes, when your horizon is very short, when I think about it, of this adjunct faculty, we have in Israel also, that they are not, it's not that they wanted to be adjunct faculty, they wanted to be faculty. And some of them may be able to make it, but they're overburdened with teaching. They have 1-year contracts, okay? How, I really, I have great admiration for them because I don't know how they manage, okay? And we are part of the problem in the way, the way the system is organized. We have created that, okay? Inequality is an issue within that context as well. Unfairness is an issue within that context as well, okay? But it's kind of, even though it's in our backyard, we look the other way. I'm generalizing, but it's a, anyway. Sorry. Yes, please. Sorry.
Yes, I'm Nathan Holder from the Netherlands Institute for Concept, but I've also worked at the National Science Council, so I've seen things growing, as you were saying, pretty much out of hand. But I also, so in the Netherlands there is not, let's say, the crazy competition between universities. There's 13 research universities and they do work together in the sense that professors from University A can work together on the same team as B and form consortia, which I think is a really strong point of the scientific system.
Yes.
But I also think that having, let's say, the old system where the governing boards of universities do decide where the money goes was also not ideal. So bringing in some sort of competitive system where you have to go for your own money, I don't see how we could come back to the system. So don't you really should have at least some sort of money divided?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was not denying the role of competition. On the contrary, what I was saying is that global competition, the way it's playing out now, in particular in two respects, the bidding up of salaries, the competition for talent, okay? There is something which is called the economics of superstars. It's a phenomenon that happens also in other fields. It's not just in academia. But the more countries there are, and the more the system grows, that economics of superstars become almost untenable. Okay, that's one. And second, take university rankings. Okay, university rankings have become, it's a nice thing to have, but they have become also a problem, because you see, universities aim at a higher place in the ranking, and you can manipulate things and make them. It's unbelievable. I mean, I've seen these things happening. Some in places that you would expect that to happen, and others in very respectable places. The as if hirings to get in the roster of the university names that will put the university in a higher place. I mean, there are all sorts of phenomena, okay, that we have to consider. The competition was there, always was there, not only between Newton and Leibniz, but always, okay? But it has to be managed in a way that is not destructive. One last question, yes. So you're very appropriate to talk about this.
Exactly. So around 3 years ago, I discovered a paradox. There were two that started to talk with the fact that we have an enormous increase in the class academics on the one hand side, and an enormous increase in knowledge. So more academic programs, more journals, more academic staff working on that topic. And we
solutions.
The research question, one, but this is a simple research question. I went to Harvard University and I started studying physics. I have to say I confirm everything you said, even if it was not in 2010 I published a paper which basically had all the results you said, our own academic reward system and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Now, what is the message? It's quite a while ago. First of all, I was happy to hear it. I'm not one of the junk takers. Second, the reward system works because that's not the reason why I'm sitting here. I got scholarships also, you have to replicate. What really surprises me is that all that I publish, I hear from a decision maker. If I understood exactly what you were doing, you're a member of the parliament. You tell me exactly the thing by a decision maker who's really starting to sit here and listen to your own words. And so my question would be, because I agree with what was said before, I mean, the critical thing is, okay, how to change it, right? So the question is obviously how to have impact, right? Scientific impact. Not in papers, not in impact factors.
True impact, yeah.
Real life, in
Right.
real world problem, serving society, etc. Or I don't know, that seems to be a lot of moral science. So how to change that? Is it really this co-production of knowledge? Is it really this collaboration with society? I mean, with decision making? Is that the goal of practice goal?
Okay, so first of all, So first of all, I'm very happy to hear that you have written about this, and I will be delighted to read the paper. So what's your name again? Sorry. Okay, I will have you write the. Okay, so I will look for the paper definitely. Okay, so I'm happy to. I will be happy to read it. In my view, the key is not to come up with one idea. The key is to turn it into a research subject for the academic community and an action item for the academic community itself. That's the thing. It has to be, you see, the change has to be self-generated.
How can you are providing the money, you know what I mean? If I get a professorship by the numbers of my paper, by the scientific impact I have, and not by talking to a mayor, talking about small problems, how can we improve that? This is not rewarded in my
Yes. No, absolutely. No, you're right. But what?
in order to change this, I think
Okay.
there needs
Fine. Okay. You okay? The problem. No. It's I'm very happy to do this. The problem is the following. First of all, I'm not a decision maker. I wish I were. I'm a member of parliament in the opposition. This is the equivalent. This is the equivalent of 5 rejections in a row of a paper you submitted to science. That's the way it feels. A good paper. So I was a decision maker. When I was essentially, Michal can tell you later on, it's like the head of the higher education system in Israel, basically, okay? And I tried to change things, okay? You mentioned, these consortiums and so forth. I set up in Israel this, the ICOR system, okay, which is exactly that function, okay? I changed the way that we budget universities in terms of there is a formula for that, okay? So that the incentives are built into the formula, okay? So what do you emphasize? More quality, yes, and so forth and so on. And it had some impact. But what's the problem? The problem is that in the end, you see, the probability that it will come from the top is very, very low. It doesn't happen most of the time. And when it happens, it can go in the wrong direction. You see? So the thing is that what you did as research should be something which is part and parcel of the research program, at least of institutes, if not of particular research as a main line of inquiry. It has to be, as we call in economic jargon, endogenous. It has to be generated from within. Okay? Nobody knows better. Nobody's going to know better than you, okay, as a member of the community, about how to change things. Okay? Politicians can only make things worse. I'm telling you with complete responsibility what I'm saying. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much.